Here's where we are in the governance series. Phase 1, seeing the system, letters 1 to 12, that is complete. We are in phase 2, designing the system, letters 13 to 30. We completed stage 1, entering design, letters 13A and 13B. We completed stage 2, stabilizing the core, letters 14 to 17. We are in stage 3, seeing clearly, letters 18 to 20. We just completed letter 19B, when decision makers lack the domain knowledge the decision requires. We are now in letter 19C, when accountability and outcome belong to different people. Letter 19A addressed whether the signal can be received by the people who need to act on it. Letter 19B addressed whether the people who receive the signal have the domain knowledge to read what it means. Letter 19C addresses a third condition that neither of those designs fully resolves. Sometimes the signal is readable, the domain knowledge is present, the decision maker understands what the signal means and what it requires. And the accountability structure ensures that the consequence of acting on that signal, the recognition for a decision that proves sound, the cost of a decision that does not, belongs to someone other than the person who received it. When the consequence of a decision and the accountability for that decision are held by different people in different roles on different timescales, the governance structure has a condition that no amount of signal quality or domain knowledge can fully compensate for. This condition appears at every level of organizational life. It appears in how customers are served, in how individuals are recognized, in how organizations allocate resources, and in how accountability travels or does not travel across time, across leadership transitions. The stories in this letter illustrate it from 4 of those levels. Each one is different. The condition is the same. The first story took place while I was a systems engineer at IBM. At the end of each year, sales territories changed. Representatives moved from one territory to the next on a defined cycle. The person who had managed a territory through November and December moved on to a new assignment in January. The person who arrived in January inherited whatever had been sold in December. The measurement system rewarded the close. Compensation was tied to whether the sale was made, not to what the sale produced for the customer over time. A representative approaching the end of the year in a territory they would not return to had a clear structural incentive. Close what could be closed before December ended. What got sold in December was not always what the customer needed. It was frequently what was on the commission payment plan. The customer signed, the representative received the credit, the territory changed, and the representative who arrived in January inherited the customer relationship that December had built. They inherited the expectations set by a sale they had not made, in conversations they had not been part of, for outcomes they had not committed to. Both the accountability and the consequence of the December decision belonged to different people. The measurement system had no mechanism for keeping them together. The customer experienced this directly. The organization did not, because the reporting system measured whether the sale was made, not whether the sale was the right one. As a systems engineer, my job was to implement whatever was sold and promised to the customer by the salesperson. The difficulty was that I was not always in those meetings. The salesperson would meet with the customer and return with notes and hand the notes to me. The notes sometimes made no sense. Many salespeople had learned the language of technology without developing a working understanding of what the language described. They could repeat what they heard in a customer meeting, from management, from engineers, from a product presentation, but they could not evaluate whether what they heard reflected what the customer actually needed. I would have to guess what had been discussed, make calls to piece together what had been promised, and build something that matched a specification I had not been part of creating. I asked the salespeople to invite me to their customer meetings. My reasoning was straightforward. If I'm in the room, I can answer technical questions immediately. The sale closes faster. The customer gets accurate information. Everyone benefits. The response consistently was, that is not the way we do things. The accountability for what was sold and the accountability for what was delivered belonged to different people operating in separate processes that were not designed to connect. I eventually became a sales engineer because the structure had created a gap between what was promised and what was possible, and the only way to close that gap was to hold both sides of it myself. What I discovered in that role changed how I understood customer relationships entirely. I advised customers on what IBM was genuinely strong at and where they would be better served by a different vendor. I was honest in ways that produced trust rather than just transactions. Customers responded to that honesty with loyalty. They saw someone who was not optimizing for commission, but for their outcome. And that is a rare thing in a structure designed to measure closes rather than consequences. I had not been given that structure by the organization. I built it informally from the inside because the formal structure had not been designed to produce it. I made a significant multi-unit technical sale representing several $1,000,000 in revenue. In a branch meeting, awards were being given for notable sales. The manager stood at the front of the room and described the sale in detail, the product, the volume, the customer. I began to stand. They called someone else's name. After the meeting, I went to my manager and asked directly, you know I made those sales. Why was someone else recognized? The answer was straightforward. The other person was having a difficult year and needed motivation. Giving them the recognition would help them perform. I asked where my motivation was. If you want me to sell, compensate me for selling. If you want the other person to sell, give them the conditions that produce selling. Doing one at the expense of the other sends a signal to everyone in the room about what performance actually produces in this organization. The phrase, you do not know how business works, is a typical response given to an inquiry as to why something happened the way it did. That statement had an impact on me, not because of what it said about me, because of what it reveals about organizations. You do not know how business works is the sentence organizations use when the person closest to the signal names something the structure is not designed to receive. It is not a character observation about the person who names the gap. It is a structural response. The organization redirecting the conversation away from the gap and toward the person who identified it. It is spoken in organizations across every industry, on every continent, in every language, in rooms where someone has named a governance condition the structure is not yet designed to address. The name changes, the sentence does not. The accountability for the sales performance and the recognition for that performance belonged to different people. The measurement system had no mechanism for keeping them together. And when someone named that gap, the structure had no designed pathway for receiving what they named. Let us look at this scenario from a different angle. People with whom I interacted during implementations and workshops describe a condition that may be familiar to many organizations that have gone through significant technology investment cycles. Products were purchased, equipment arrived, and in many cases, the equipment remained in its boxes for years. The purchase decisions have been made at one level of the organization. The implementation decisions, who would install the equipment, who would configure it, and who would train the people responsible for operating it, had never been fully designed. The accountability for the purchase and the accountability for the outcome of the purchase belong to different functions on different timelines with no design connection between them. The engineers responsible for the network had equipment they had never been told they owned. I encountered this condition regularly when teaching advanced technology courses. Students would tell me two things at the start of a session. They wanted to understand what they had been doing for the past 10 years, and they wanted to know what had been purchased because no one had told them. It became my responsibility as the instructor to do the work that both salesperson and the implementation engineer had not done, to explain what the product was, why the organization had it, and what it was designed to produce. The accountability for that explanation had landed on the person in the room with the least authority to address what had produced the condition. A second expression of the same condition appeared in the application work described in letter 19A. Between versions of the software, screens changed, naming conventions changed, configuration parameters changed. Engineers who had learned a pathway in one version found that pathway no longer existed in the next. The knowledge they had built became unreliable, not because they had learned it incorrectly, but because no one owned the continuity of the system across versions. The accountability for version control and the consequence of its absence belonged to different people. The engineers who experienced the consequence had no authority over the release process that created it. The consultants and instructors who absorbed the customer-facing consequence had no authority over the design decisions that produced it. The gap landed on the people closest to the customer and farthest from the decision. This is not an unusual condition. It is a common governance gap in technology-intensive organizations, and it is among the less visible, because the people absorbing the consequence are frequently doing so quietly, professionally, and without a formal mechanism for naming what they are carrying. These four stories do not describe the same event. They describe the same structural condition seen from four different positions inside organizational life. In each one, a decision was made. A consequence followed. The person who made the decision and the person who experienced the consequence were not the same person. The accountability structure had no design mechanism for keeping them connected. Consequential displacement, the condition in which the consequence of a decision arrives at a different person, in a different role, at a different time than the decision that produced it. The accountability for the decision and the accountability for its outcome are held by different people, with no design connection between them. Consequential displacement is not the same as delegation. Delegation is a design transfer of authority with explicit accountability. In delegation, the person who receives the responsibility also receives the accountability for the outcome. Consequential displacement is structural. It is the condition that emerges when the governance design does not require the consequence of a decision to remain traceable to the decision that produced it, across time, across role transitions, across organizational boundaries. It does not require anyone to act in bad faith. The sales representative who closed in December was responding rationally to a measurement system that rewarded closes. The manager who redirected the award was responding rationally to a motivation challenge. The purchasing team that bought equipment without a design implementation pathway was responding to a procurement process that measured acquisition, not deployment. Each person was doing what their structure asked of them. The gap was in the design. Three signals mark its presence in an organization. Well, that was before my time. That was a different team's decision. We inherited this condition. Each of these sentences is accurate, and each of them is a signal that the accountability for a decision and the consequence of that decision have been separated by a governance structure that was not designed to keep them together. What this means for your organization: consequential displacement tends to be among the more invisible governance conditions in operation, precisely because it looks like normal organizational life. People move between roles. Decisions have long time horizons. Teams hand off to other teams. None of these are signs of governance failure by themselves. The gap appears when there is no design mechanism for the accountability of a decision to travel with the consequence of that decision across those transitions. The following three questions are worth bringing into a leadership conversation. Not as a diagnostic applied from the outside, but as a starting point for a conversation the organization may not yet have had the language to have. For significant decisions made in the past 2 to 3 years, is there a design mechanism for tracing the consequence of those decisions back to the people and structures that produced them? Or has the accountability structure shifted in ways that have separated the decision from its outcome? In measurement systems currently in use, are the people being measured on the decisions they make or on the short-term signals those decisions produce? And Is there a design mechanism for the longer-term consequence of those decisions to remain connected to the accountability structure that made them? When consequences arrive that no one can trace back to their origin, is there a governance pathway for naming that gap and redesigning the accountability structure that produced it? Or does the organization respond by managing the consequence without examining the decision that caused it? Organizations that find these questions easy to answer with specificity and confidence tend to have designed consequence traceability into their governance structure deliberately. For those where the answers are less immediate, consequential displacement may be operating in decisions whose consequences have not yet arrived, or in consequences whose origins have already been lost. The formal design response to consequential displacement belongs to stage 4 of this series. It is named there because it requires the full architecture of what stage 2 and stage 3 have built before it can be designed effectively. But naming the condition here matters because the organization that can recognize consequential displacement before it names it structurally is already better positioned than the one that encounters it only after the consequence has arrived and the origin is no longer traceable. Stage 3 has addressed 5 conditions of seeing clearly. Signal integrity design ensures the right data is being captured. Governing signal definition ensures the right question is being answered. Signal translation design ensures the signal can be received by the people who need to act on it. Domain sufficiency design and engaged oversight design ensure those people have the knowledge to read what the signal means, and this letter has named the condition that persists even when all of those designs are in place, when the accountability structure separates the decision from its consequence before anyone can act on what they know. There's one more condition of seeing clearly that stage 3 has not yet addressed. Everything in stage 3 to this point has been about what travels upward, whether the right information reaches the people who need to see it, whether those people can read it, whether the accountability structure is designed to act on it. Letter 20 asks the question that follows from all of that. When the signal travels upward and governance responds, when leadership sees clearly and acts on what it sees, does what travels back down land with the clarity it was intended to carry? Seeing clearly is not only about what the organization receives, it is also about what it sends. And the distance between the boardroom and the ground is precisely where the integrity of that signal gets tested. Letter 28 asks, what happens when the signal goes out but does not land? The pattern introduced in this letter, consequential displacement, which resolves to formal design response in stage 4. Thank you.